Hi, welcome back to my channel, and today we're going to be talking about the Shades of Magic trilogy. Cool. So I started reading the Shades of Magic trilogy in April. I read book 1 and 2 in April, and then book 3 I finished now. Oh no, that was in... I said it wrong. I started in March, and then I read the third one in April. So the first book is The Darker Shade of Magic, and then we get a Gathering of Shadows, and then you get a Conjuring of Light. Now, Brandon Sanderson recommended this book to people, which is why I was like, okay, so I need to get on this. It's written by Via Schwab, and I am in love with her Vicious and Vengeful series. I believe it's supposed to be a trilogy, but so far it's a duology, and I really enjoy those books. Though I think that the YA series Shades of Magic she publishes under the name of Victoria Schwab instead of Via Schwab, but I could be wrong there. Anyway, so I was like, okay, so Brandon Sanderson told me to read it. Who am I to say no, right? So I started reading book 1. I'm a little bit disappointed. Like the series as a whole, I gave it a 3.5 stars because it is enjoyable. I'm not sad that I read it. It's just it didn't hit the right spots for me. First of all, this series is great for beginners of adult fantasy. It is YA technically, but it doesn't have a lot of the YA characteristics that we are used to seeing for a younger YA that annoys a lot of people. So in the tropes that it does have, they are executed in a way that is quite interesting. I think that if you've been reading YA fantasy for a long time and you want to get into adult fantasy, that's a good point to transition you into it, because it's very interesting and it's very well done. The positives of this series are V. Schwab's writing, always perfect. The woman cannot write prose that is bad. She can't. She just isn't capable of it. All of her prose, even when she gets to a couple points that can be a little bit, not cringy, but I would say a little bit cliche, she spins them in a way where the clichéness of it works. I don't know how to explain it. I just really like her writing. The best thing about the whole series is the world. The world is amazing. The magic is awesome. It works in a way that there's multiple Londons. There's 4, I think. And each of them, there's one guy, and his name is Kel, and this guy, he travels between those ones, and they're entirely different worlds. The only thing that's the same about them is a convergence, that is the city of London, and even the city is different in multiple places, but he travels between them, and he'll send letters, carry the letters from every monarch of every place, and then every London has a different level of magic. So he comes from Red London, which has a lot of magic, but then there's Black London, which nobody goes into, is quarantined, which had too much magic and it just consumed itself. And then there's White London, which has some magic but not enough, and people are crazy hungry for it. And then there is Grey London, which would be our London in the 1800s somewhere, which has no magic. And then so that's one of the main characters. Now my problem with him is that even though in the first book particularly he is interesting to be with, it's fun to be in his head, he is not fleshed out enough for me. I don't feel I understand him by the first book alone, which is sad because the first book kind of reads as a standalone. You could just read the first book and stop. There's no... Well, saying that there's no hook for book 2 is a little bit unfair. It does have a hook for book 2, but not enough that would hurt your... you won't lose sleep at night because you don't know the end of the story. So book 1 felt like the plot was too basic, even though the world made it worth it because it was so much fun. Now, book 2 gets a little bit more interesting, right? In book 1 we meet a cast of characters, and in book 2 it really feels like the characters get depth. It's my favorite book of the whole entire trilogy. I feel like that's my favorite book because it felt smaller. The plot has a smaller scope to it. It's not as grand and as epic as book 1 and 3. And I enjoyed that a lot. It involves, let's just say that it involves a contest of magical ability, and that's all I needed to know. It has great descriptions of fighting and the way that the magic works, because the magic has an elemental side to it, which is amazing. It's really cool. And then there's the Antari, which can basically mess with more than the four elements, and it's a whole thing, and it's really, really interesting. I recommend you read it for that reason. It's my favorite book, I think, of the trilogy. I gave it 4 stars. And then book 3, A Conjuring of Light, is good, and I feel like it would be great if the first 2 books had like pulled its weight, because the third book has a lot of emotional scenes and emotional storylines that happen, but because I didn't really connect with the characters in book 1 and 2 as much as I wanted to, book 3, some parts of it felt a little bit flat, and that's sad because I really wanted to enjoy it. A lot of it didn't. A lot of it was really deep and important, and it felt amazing, but it just felt a little bit flat in some other parts. But it did explore a little bit more of the villains, and it explored a little bit more of a lot of the relationships and some romance, and the romance in the series is actually quite decent. It's not exactly what I would call good, because some couples, it felt like they had more chemistry with other people, and it wasn't like a triangle situation. It was just like, it felt to me like the friendships were written too well, in a way that when she wrote a character like a romance, the romance felt flat, or it felt like just not as colorful, not as interesting, because the friendships were written as well that well, which, you know, good friendships, that's great. I love friendships in books, but I also love romance in books. And that made me a tiny little bit sad. I gave it 3.5 stars. So it was 3 stars for the book 1, 4 stars for book 2, and 3.5 stars for book 3. All in all, I feel like if you would like to read some really fun fantasy, not as long, and with like a magical system that really brings the world to life, I would recommend it to you. But unfortunately, it wasn't my favorite read of the year. But you know, Brandon Sanderson did recommend it, so I'm probably just wrong. This was great, and I guess I'll see you all later.